It's good to see you today. It is February 21st. Our reading comes from the book of Leviticus, Leviticus chapter 14, and we're going to be looking in verses 33 through chapter 16. And frankly, not looking forward to these first few chapters, even as we just usually skim them. But you have the laws for cleansing houses. Our reading started in verse 33. And this is where the priest would go in and examine the house to see whatever's causing this plague, if it's still there, if it's spreading, whatever the case may be. Perhaps it wasn't spreading and the house would be all right. If not, they would have to basically tear down the house. But anyway, that's dealing with leprosy and plague, things like that. There are interesting lessons for today as you look at some of these passages concerning plague, thinking about such things as quarantining. Chapter 15, it's the law about bodily discharges. And you can read all about that in great detail. It's interesting to say the least. Come on to chapter 16, though. Chapter 16 is the Day of Atonement, and as it would be commanded once a year. And you have the animals being offered. You have verse 2, tell Aaron your brother not to come at just any time into the holy place. Verse 3, with the blood of a young bull of a sin offering and of a ram as a burnt offering. Certain garments would be worn. Verse 6, Aaron shall offer the bull as a sin offering, which is for himself. Come back to that idea. But you have the Day of Atonement, and as you have in verse 15, the goat of the sin offering, and that would be killed for the people, bringing its blood inside the veil. But then, of course, you have the scapegoat, the live goat, verse 21, and you have the Day of Atonement, and the commandments being given for the Day of Atonement. And as it says, they were commanded to afflict their souls. Verse 31, it is a Sabbath of solemn rest for you, and you shall afflict your souls. It is a statute forever. What points might we consider with the Day of Atonement? I think one thing we should consider is Aaron's inadequacy. And what we mean by that is the first thing he had to do was he had to make an offering for himself, as we saw in verse 11. Aaron shall bring the bull of the sin offering, which is for himself, and make atonement for himself and for his house, and shall kill the bull as the sin offering, which is for himself. As we look at the high priests throughout the Old Testament, we recognize the truth of the matter. None of them were perfect. None of them were perfect. And in that we see Aaron's inadequacy. There are other inadequacies, though, as we think about Scripture and we think about Hebrews. One of the inadequacies was, frankly, Aaron would die. The high priest would die, and someone else would have to take their place. So that's an inadequacy. That inadequacy, in what we're looking at, is just the inadequacies in the Day of Atonement. One of them pertains to Aaron, and the inadequacy of the high priest and the priesthood in general. But also in the Day of Atonement, we see the inadequacy of the offerings. And I'm not even talking about the offerings on the Day of Atonement. I'm talking about the previous offerings that had been made. All through Leviticus, we have the commandments for sin offerings, for burnt offerings, for peace offerings, for grain offerings. It goes on and on and on and on and on. And they were commanded to make those offerings, and those offerings were being all the time. And yet here on the Day of Atonement, this offering is going to be made for the sins of the people. What were all those other offerings for? And even what is this offering for? We'll come back to that. But what you see is I already made an offering for that sin that I committed a week ago. I already made an offering for that. Yep. Now you need to make another offering. Well, why is that? And what the Lord I think is teaching them, and what we see, and of course hindsight is 2020. The blood of bulls and goats doesn't take away sins. I know you already made an offering for that sin. But it's not enough. And even in this offering, we see the inadequacy of this offering as well on the Day of Atonement. Chapter 15, then he shall kill the goat of the sin offering, which is for the people. Bring its blood inside the veil to do with the blood as he did with the blood of the bull. Sprinkle it on the mercy seat before them. Right? Sprinkle it on the mercy seat and before the mercy seat. So he shall make atonement for the holy place because of the uncleanness of the children of Israel and because of their transgressions. Right? The sin offering, which is for the people. And he's done, right? No. Verse 21. When he has made an end of atoning for the holy place, he shall bring the live goat, and lay both his hands on the head of the live goat, confess over it all the iniquities of the children of Israel, and all their transgressions concerning their sins, putting them on the head of the goat, and he shall send it away into the wilderness by the hand of a suitable man. The goat shall bear on itself all their iniquities to an uninhabited land, and he shall release the goat in the wilderness. And you're done, right? No. Because of this. This shall be an everlasting statute for you to make atonement for the children of Israel for all their sins once a year. And he did as the Lord commanded Moses. So we see the inadequacy of it, because the blood of bulls and goats not take away sin. They're doing these things to make atonement for the people. But every year, there's a remembrance. And even as the other offerings are being made outside the Day of Atonement, there's still a remembrance. And this is a constant thing. A constant thing that God commanded for them to see that the life is in the blood, but the blood of bulls and goats isn't going to take away sins. And they need atonement. Aaron needs atonement. His sons need atonement. Moses needs atonement. All of this is bringing the people together. I think that's one of the lessons. This is bringing the people together in unity, but it's also bringing the people together to see the need for the Messiah. And there's so many things within the Day of Atonement that you see. You see the slain animal, but then you see the living animal. And we see how that's a shadow of Jesus. Did Jesus die or did Jesus live? Yes. Yes. That's what Jesus did. Come on up to Hebrews. As we think about the inadequacies of the old, in Hebrews chapter 7, if I could actually get to Hebrews, that would be helpful, wouldn't it? Pardon me. In Hebrews chapter 7, at verse 26, for such a high priest was fitting for us, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and has become higher than the heavens, who does not need daily, as those high priests, to offer up sacrifices, first for his own sins, and then for the people's. For this he did once for all, when he offered up himself. For the law appoints as high priests men who have weakness, but the word of the oath, which came after the law, appoints the Son who has been perfected forever. And perhaps you saw earlier the priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Aaron was inadequate. The daily offerings were inadequate. And even the Day of Atonement was inadequate. It's Jesus who fulfills. It's Jesus who fulfills it. But of course, they were under the tutor, and they were doing these things in faith as God had commanded them. But God's bringing them along, and He's teaching them. And in learning these lessons, of course, He teaches us as well, as we see the shadow, and it helps us to appreciate the substance even more, Jesus Himself. Hope you've been doing well. Appreciate you studying along with us, and I hope you tune in for our next study. Thanks for following along.